some slides to share with you, but I appreciate sort of that if we could sort of turn this more into a conversation. So please let's, think about sort of what questions you have, and maybe sort of as we're getting ready sort of in the chat, just tell me sort of what's your specialty and whether this is our first time in meeting or not. That way I can sort of maybe not cover some of the basic things that I did last year and move the needle, or start at the beginning in terms of this first time together. As we go through this conversation about diversity, equity, inclusion, I think it's really important to recognize that sort of all those three words, mean different things to different people. And I think that within sort of the pandemic that you all have been with us enduring, inclusion is sort of a threat, a challenge. How do we best take care of ourselves? How do we sort of replenish, put gas in our tank in terms of sort of doing the work so far as maintaining the excellence in terms of care and research and teaching that you all do? And it's a challenge. As we move forward, starting back, it's September and we're kind of back into that whole mojo of it's another year, let's rock and roll. Most people I've been talking to have been pretty tired. And so sort of, how do I get that energy to kind of sort of do it? But it's really important. You taking care of yourselves is absolutely essential for yourself, for your families, for your communities, for the patients you care about, for the work that you do. And so that's at the heart of sort of making what we do in DEI relevant to mission, because part of mission is that everybody's okay and we move forward. So with that, I'm going to just share the screen and invite you all to, if you would be kind enough, let me see if this will behave. I think that maybe by the time we stop using Zoom, I will figure out the unmute button as well as, be perfect at this. So here we go. So my first question to you is just, who's here? So please share with me in terms of sort of this, who's here? How many years out are we talking about? What's your specialty? And where are you joining us from? Just so we sort of know who all's in the pool here. So in the time that I have with you here, I'm going to give a few comments, and then if whatever time we have remaining, we can get into some one-on-one conversations about some issues. As Maureen mentioned, happy to do the unmute thing so we can sort of talk about some stuff. I want to start at some of the basics, the overview and terminology, some of the areas and opportunities, and then wind up talking about sort of how you can work with us in terms of really having it pop to go from good to great. All right, so my intention is just a collective conversation on strategies to improve diversity, equity, inclusion, and all the things that you do. It's interesting when people say someone's coming in and we want to make this relative to, relevant to their job. And oftentimes when I talk specifically in terms of physician's job, there isn't a job. You do many, if not all of these things. Our jobs are complicated and the expectations from us are complicated as well. And so how do we do in all these different microclimes in terms of sort of making a difference here? So our goal in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion is get us excellence in terms of clinical and health outcomes, innovative discoveries, and education and training. I really view this as sort of how do we go from good to great? Making sure we have the right members of the team, making sure everybody is able to contribute and is valued, and being able to sort of move it forward in terms of sort of that innovation. That gets us from good to great. And that's at the heart of sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion pieces. It's about the day job. It's about mission excellence. So diversity is this optimizing your team's impact, working more effectively, improving skills as a leader, physician, and scientist in our diverse society. Maureen and I were just talking about the diversification of the state of Minnesota. There's a Toro plant right up by the border of Canada that apparently has a huge diaspora of Puerto Ricans, which I jokingly said, I'm not sure they got the geography memo that it's not the same weather. But we have diversification, not just in the Twin Cities, but all across, predating us in terms of our Native American colleagues, and certainly expanding as we sort of move forward. And our missions here in terms of that to you, including sort of in the one campus piece of our Duluth physical campus, is that rural family medicine as well as sort of Native and the rest of sort of the state. So diversity is all about all of us. Many of you have probably seen this sort of cartoon, and the cartoon still stands. I think maybe baseball's being still played. I don't know. You'll tell me. But when we talk about equity, equity means starting with the end in mind. First, we have to say, what's the goal? So in this, we have three individuals. And if we say that all three of them, it's valid, that they should all be able to say the baseball game, maybe all think about growing up and becoming a professional baseball player, and that we all agree that's a goal that we want to sort of move forward to. Then we look at the first thing where everybody gets the same box, sort of like everybody getting a lollipop. And you notice that we don't achieve the goal because they're different. They're not all the same. They're not out of a 3D printer, and we don't achieve that goal of access. We don't achieve equity. If we look at box 2, we see, guess what? All of them can now see the game. So it's equitable. We've achieved the goal that we set. And the last piece is, imagine if just coming as you are, you could see the game. That's where we get rid of some of those barriers and have them removed in terms of achieving our goal. That's sort of the deeper work in terms of structural transformation so that we can get all of the talent with us as we move forward. When I say inclusive environment, I mean these things: common purpose of meaningful work, respect, trust, cultural and structural competence, equitable reward and recognition, access to opportunity, appreciation of individual attributes, and a sense of belonging. And when we create organizations that do this, it does all these amazing things. You know, there's the meaningful work, there's hands-on, there's investment, it's a humanistic workplace, there's a culture of recognition, we get seen, others get seen, it's dynamic, it's high impact and sort of cultural learning, there's transparency and honesty and inspiration. It's a place that's really fabulous. And one of the challenges in terms of the COVID pandemic is it's really been challenging in terms of our workspaces. We don't have that social glue that you can go by the water cooler and run into somebody and then chat with them and then go out for lunch later. If you want to talk to somebody, you got to set up a Zoom meeting or a telehealth meeting. And so it's really been sort of difficult, and we have to get back sort of that in real life experience, those learning sort of feelings together. And so we have to do some healing during this pandemic as we get to sort of the other side. You all know just as well as I do, issues in terms of awareness of not just the pandemic of COVID, but it sort of ripped the Band-Aid off of the fact that there was an ongoing pandemic of racism long before George Floyd's death. And we know that this is something that we have to sort of pay attention to. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take time. It didn't happen quickly. And sort of having it be sort of an opportunity that we have all the talent that we need into healthcare, that we are able to address health disparities that many of you see every single day. How do we sort of do this so that it gets better? So it's going to be sort of in the collective in terms of doing that. When we talk about inclusive climate, we know there's work to be done. We know in terms of data that comes from the AAMC, as far as gender sort of harassment, that rates are really high, both for women as well as 1 in 8 men. Not feeling safe, and if you don't feel safe, you're not engaged. If you're not engaged, you're more likely to leave. And so you bring somebody in, and because it's not sort of an inclusive space, they leave. And so we're working in terms of lots of different groups to say, how do we need to make room in terms of sort of that inclusion? So our goals in the office, the inaugural Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, is to enable inclusive excellence in research, care, education, and a productive work environment, to recruit talent in equity and sort of opportunity, to engage everybody in the School of Medicine, which includes you all as our alumni, to improve the quality and impact of efforts, to shine a light on who's doing the fabulous stuff. If some of you out there are doing some really wonderful things, tell us. We created a newsletter just to sort of talk about the great stuff that's out there. We need to hear about this. And then engage in the spirit of inquiry to be able to address sort of healthcare disparities. So our office teaches, serves, helps to heal, and sort of explores. We provide support in terms of technical assistance and capacity building for some of our scholars in the innovation space that I'll talk about in a minute, pipelines for those that are underrepresented in medicine. We serve in terms of our DI collaborators internally and externally. We recruit talented individuals to come and join sort of our ranks in terms of sort of training and care and innovation. We pursue research in terms of DEI projects, and we try to address unmet needs and do outreach to our communities. So some of our wins for this year, to date, we have 7 national awards in recognition. Our Center for Women in Medicine and Science has received an NIH Gender Equity Award. They've also received a AAMC Best sort of Group Award in terms of their work so far as gender equity. Our colleague, Dr. Mary Owen, located in our Duluth campus, received the National DEI Exemplary Leader Award. I had the opportunity that I'm chair-elect at the AAMC, the National Group on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and we actually had sort of a student, one of our talented students up in the Duluth campus, Tegan Carr, who's a Herb Nickens Scholar. There's only 7 of those awards given out every year, and we've had great representation at the University of Minnesota in terms of the national stage. We also were selected to be one of a select group to conduct anti-racism medical education structural transformation, and that's sort of upcoming in terms of sort of the work. We now have 100% of our departments with DEI point people. 3 of those as vice chair, 1 as an endowed chair, and other leads. Altogether, we have 39 unique groups, postdocs, student groups, professional staff, all moving the needle on DEI. Those folks have done more than 267 events, activities, awards, sessions on DEI. We've submitted a U54 NIH Structural Transformation Grant to sort of help in our work and collaborate with the university on their NSF-funded iChange grant. And we've had some articles published about how to get the most out of your DEI committee in terms of making change, as well as sort of gender equity. And just to give you an idea of who all, it takes a village in terms of this work in every department, in every space, across both our Twin Cities, as well as sort of our Duluth campus. We have sort of individuals hard at work in terms of saying, what does including talent look like here? What does equity look like here? What does a diverse workforce and an inclusive space in this work? And so these are all individuals that are working with us in terms of sort of making that change. As I mentioned, 39 committees and a lot of work that's been happening, much of it that's available for archived on our website. And so feel free to sort of check that out in terms of there. Some additional wins, we've increased the number of our diverse early career research scholars. We have a new BIPOC scholar group coming together just to build community and help in terms of inclusion. We've had more community engagement and outreach on COVID prevention and health promotion. We've collaborated with our Native American colleagues on health in a number of different areas, as well as have the privilege of having the Center for Indigenous Health within sort of the ODEI space. We have a new newsletter, we have website revisions, monthly Dean seminars available. We successfully recruited a diverse BAMD class for our pipeline. We've BIPOC GME community building efforts. And then we've also looked in terms of measuring some of this change, putting an evaluation framework, having some of our senior leaders engage in intercultural development inventories, having sort of our stakeholders tell us where we're starting with, if you will, right now, so far as diversity, equity, inclusion, and doing sort of unit work in the foundational principles of inclusive excellence. We've worked in innovation and discovery in terms of our colleagues at the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, in terms of working in that space. We have our rapid response grants to reduce health disparities ongoing. We have a program in health disparities research. We have a T32 MD sort of PhD program looking at sort of issues about ethics and research professional identity as it relates to inclusion and inclusive excellence. And we have health equity leadership and mentoring programs that are ongoing. In education and training, we have good, wonderful engagement in terms of our students, Medical Education Reform Coalition and Task Force for Change. We have 2 faculty who have come on board to work to create a thread about health disparities across the 4 years of training with a handoff to our residents and fellowship GME colleagues. And we have ongoing sort of impact from our Center for American Indian and Minority Health. 4 graduates, Native American graduates graduated from the Duluth part of our campus last year. And we continue in terms of our path and some of the really innovative stuff that we do in terms of rural medicine, in terms of education and training, and have lots of sort of specific sort of DEI collaborators in terms of moving the needle. One of the things I mentioned earlier was We are one of a cohort of individuals, the anti-racism transformation and medical education workforce team. It was a competitive selection. And here's sort of some of the folks that are going to be engaged. They represent our partners at the University of Minnesota Physicians Group, as well as sort of our folks located up in Duluth in our graduate school. So a diverse sort of group of folks in terms of engaging in that process and helping us inform, again, how do we go from good to great? Okay, community engagement, in addition to housed in the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, our COVID task force, we also have a number of work happening, the program in health disparities research, our colleagues in family medicine who support the ladder program for elementary age students, as well as sort of prevention research centers as we sort of move forward, as well as a new one that just came up this morning, the talent garden with our colleagues at Sahennepin in terms of ways to increase sort of workforce diversity. So who all and what all is in the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion? I mentioned our very award-winning, multi-award-winning Center for Women in Science, Medicine and Science, our Center for American Indian and Minority Health that's being renamed Center for Indigenous Health, and the amazing work that they continue to do and have done for many years. In addition, we have our pipeline programs, including our BA&D program, our Early Career Research Award program for research intensive junior faculty sort of coming on board, our COVID Community Engagement and Confidence Unit, our Office of Minority and Affairs and Diversity, now called the Center for Multicultural Access and Engagement, and then technical capacity building and training, as well as sort of DEI and grants and our scholars group. So lots of ways to connect with us. You can click on our webpage. We're in the process of sort of doing web version 2.0. We have those monthly Dean's Lecture series that are available, including archived ones. So feel free to sort of check some of those out. We have a monthly newsletter that comes out in terms of just happenings around here. And so with all of these, I sort of joke, sharing is caring. We'd love to hear some of the good stuff that you have, or some ideas or questions you have that you think we should sort of include in our newsletter and be able to sort of address. So we need you. We need your insight. We need your support. We need you as mentors and allies in terms of moving this forward. And we need your insight in terms of how do we transform medicine and sort of really go from good to great in mission. What are things that you're already doing that we can shine the light on in terms of exemplars? What are things that you would find particularly useful to help the work that you're doing? And how do we sort of move from words to action? You know, words are lovely, but you know, most of us in medicine and health, it's about getting the job done. So what is the do that sort of has to happen in terms of getting there? So we're delighted to sort of hear from you, as well as sort of get you engaged, because there's lots of work to be done. So with that, I'll just close with sort of any questions or comments or thoughts. And I'm gonna stop sharing here because I think it's better to see people than slides, and see what questions you all have. Great. Yeah, no, well, thank you. Thank you absolutely for sort of joining us. The only way we're going to get it done is to have sort of folks on mission sort of help us. I'll share with you sort of fun facts. Maybe you know this already. On an average, about 50,000 people try to get into med school. There's about 22,000 slots. Because of the pandemic, there's been between a 30% and 70% increase in those numbers. So we don't know what it's going to be in this season. We had about a 50% increase here at the U this past year. So that's a lot of work in terms of screening sort of talented individuals. And from my senses, we have so many sort of talented individuals to be able to join us. So it's really important work. You know, the only way we get it right in terms of diversifying our workforce and getting the best of the best is for the work of sort of admissions committee. So I think that that's one of those really integral places in the med school. So thank you. I think the coolest thing in terms of medical school admissions, and being around long enough, I've seen it sort of when it was just kind of almost like an academic Russian roulette. You just throw in some numbers. What's the GPA, you know, and what's their MCATs, and there you go. This is what's left, and you pick one kind of thing. That we've figured out something that we kind of all know. And that is that excellent doctors and scientists are people that are critical thinkers, that finish what they start, that inspire others, that have the talent to become great leaders. And all of those attributes and skills are bundled into this term, a holistic approach. Because of course, you got to be able to sort of get there in terms of being successful so far as licensure. But you need to also look at sort of who we bring in the field. So holistic approach first says, metric wise, can these people cut it in terms of the rigor of medicine? And then once they can, who are these people and how do they sort of promote sort of some of the things that we need to go from good to great? So I think that holistic approach is a really great way to do it. And I think that there are some places that did these kind of automated things, put them through little simulations, but didn't have practicing physicians talk with them. And I think they left some excellence on the table. So I think that being able to sort of have, shall we say, the sniff test of like, does this person have what's going on is really good. Any of us in any type of recruitment, admissions or residency or whatever, it's really important to sort of undergo implicit bias training because you don't know what you don't know. And so to be able to bring it all out, that training is sort of really important in terms of getting the job done. So I think implicit bias training, learning about sort of the field from sort of what the admissions thing is happening now, and then meeting some amazing students and having the hard choice of seeing lots and lots of great people in terms of who can sort of come here to train with us. So I think that's what I would say in terms of admissions. So David, you mentioned, you asked the question, how do you measure progress in your field, which is an awesome question. And it sort of goes back to what I was saying to Paul about you don't know what you don't know. For many of us, the world is sort of set up so that we can kind of be like a fish in water. We don't have to pay attention to the water. We don't have to change the water. It just is. And so changing it up is hard because we don't even see a lot of the stuff that's happening. So education and awareness about what we're even talking about. If you've never experienced something, and I would submit to you that you have expertise in this because you take care of patients. Patients have lots of experiences that you personally will not experience, hopefully, in terms of sort of health and illness. But having that understanding of tell me what it's like for you so I can understand and how do we work together, that is germane in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion work. We need to be able to see, are we inclusive for everyone? Are we inclusive for women and men? Are we inclusive for talent who's diverse? Who all sort of feels like they're okay here. One of the analogies I give for diversity, equity, inclusion is like a barbecue. Diversity means we invite everybody and we ask questions of who'd we forget to make sure we invite them so that all the talent comes. In equity, whether you just ate or you're super hungry, your belly gets filled. And in inclusion, we're so delighted every single person's here and everybody gets a turn at the grill because you're so important. And so being able to sort of see what's our status quo and how well are we in terms of what we aspire and what we're actually doing, and measuring sort of those differences is part of that. So part of it is, as I mentioned to Paul, things like implicit bias training, things like intercultural development inventories to help people get their own aha moment of what's working and what's not working, and how do we need to move forward in terms of a more inclusive environment? How do we need to put front and center some of these health disparities that seem refractory, but really aren't, if we come together in terms of critical thinking to figure it out? So different measures in terms of educational progress. What are we doing in terms of sort of getting it right? Right now, both nationally and locally, there's a lot of work in terms of making sure that if we have biomedical markers, they're actually biomedical markers. So glomerular filtration rate, GFR, is being looked at because there are biologic and social markers in GFR. And being able to reconfigure it so it really is just biomedical and accurate is really important. So national nephrology societies, et cetera, are looking at changing sort of GFR so that it is such. So that we can sort of better address issues in terms of renal disease. That's a super specific one. In education, are we sort of being able to understand about sort of population health to be able to sort of address some of these differences and have people look at sort of the sociocultural developments of health, determinants of health that you all have learned just by your sort of clinical acumen and experience, but bringing that sooner so we don't have to wait till they're training or further. And in innovation, looking in terms of who's at the table to come up with sort of inquiry and questions, so that we can have sort of maybe new innovations that we didn't even think of. So it depends on sort of what area, so far as clinical and health outcomes, education and training, as well as sort of in terms of who all gets invited to the party. How inclusive are we in terms of having access? And some of that's pipeline stuff. And many of you I know already do some wonderful mentoring things. So how many more people are we getting in the pipeline so far as mentorship? How many people are we including in terms of sort of diversifying sort of our workforce? There's, metrics that have to do with representational diversity, as well as cognitive diversity, getting these unique questions in terms of movement. One of the reasons I sort of have both individuals in each department, as well as DEI committees, is I'm not going to tell neurosurgery how they should do their work. That'd be silly. I'm a general internist. But they can say with each other, what is it that we all need to do as baseline competencies in diversity, equity, inclusion? And then what else do we need to do to go from good to great? So progress is building this infrastructure. Progress is them naming sort of some of these things, as well as sort of having the ability to everybody understand DEI work from good to great is just like hand washing. It's just like excellence and dedication to your patients. It's something we all have to do. And so what does that look like here? So getting those measures delineated in an explicit way and being able to sort of have representational diversity as well as sort of impact. Those are sort of the menu in terms of some of the progress progress in our field. The university, by the way, has very ambitious sort of Impact 2025 measures in terms of diversifying both professional staff and students and trainees. And so that's sort of a place that we sort of align with as well in terms of progress from that perspective, as well as sort of other external bodies so far as licensure, sort of saying where are we in terms of moving forward. So we align with a lot of different places depending on sort of what part of mission we're talking about. Gerald, all right. The class has evolved since 1957. Of course, Gerald. Yes, of course, right? How could we? So we all have, right? There are just 4 women in the class. Wow. Okay. I understand that until the mid-50s, that applicants whose parent was a physician allied had some priority. So applicants whose parents were a merchant or farmer had equal access. Retired physician, occupational medicine. The whole issue in terms of sort of legacy and access continues to be sort of a huge challenge, because I think that there is kind of a push me pull you that if you've learned how to sort of be in this field, you kind of know perhaps what your children know what they're getting into. But we do want sort of that access. And I think that Gerald, in terms of what I was mentioning before to Paul about admissions, is that a holistic sort of approach puts all of those things in. So if you're coming in terms of sort of a farm family, in terms of sort of rural, that's core in terms of sort of Minnesota. Minnesota is a very rural state, which also has urban elements and has lots of diversity. And so we want all of that sort of in our class. So I think that it's blending in terms of sort of those attributes that are really important. We actually, I believe, I wish I should have looked this up. I apologize. I should have talked to our admissions dean, Dimple Patel, but I do believe we were just a titch over 50% of women versus men in our entering class. And about 41% of them are BIPOC. We still have very small numbers of underrepresented, historically excluded, underrepresented minorities, so we still have work to do. But certainly in the gender space, like a lot of places across the country, we have an adequacy or approaching adequacy of representation of women in our medical school. If we look about women in leadership in medical school, that's a different question. And so there still are sort of issues in terms of even in women predominant medical fields, very few women are leaders. And so there's still need in terms of equity, in terms of moving that forward. But I agree with you, Gerald. Fortunately, we've come a long way, and I look forward to sort of what we're going to be doing next in terms of improving that. Other comments, questions?
Actually, I think on your penultimate slide, you asked a number of great questions of the alumni that I think would be really interesting to see people's input on that. Don't mind bringing that up again?
Sure. let me.
And while Dr. Nunez is working on that, if you want to use the raise hand button, I can unmute your mic for you so you don't have to type everything.
Okay. I'll share with you that having people see themselves as you are in terms of their roles, lots of folks, and I could say in terms of sort of as a first gen, there weren't, my parents didn't know lots of folks who were doctors. So having an opportunity to spend some time sort of shadowing, getting inspired by you all, that's something that we need. We need sort of mentors, we need sort of allies in terms of being able to have that support. I will fall back though from my very beginning of comments, which is, but first we need you to be okay and you to sort of fill your tanks, because the pandemic has been beastly. It's been hard on everybody. We know in terms of just the field of medicine, almost 40% of women are sort of either going from full-time to not, or leaving the profession. We have other folks who are sort of closer in terms of sort of retiring, sort of saying, I was going to, but now I am, just because it's been so difficult. And so we need you all to be okay, whether you're continuing to sort of work or whether you're retired, we need you to be okay, because it's we need your help so far as inspiring who comes next, moving down the pike. So first and foremost is you and your family and your communities being okay, and then in being sort of gracious and caring with us and helping us in terms of moving this forward. We can only do this together. When we talked about sort of those evaluations, it's sort of, I refer to myself in this inaugural role as collaborator in chief. I can help others help themselves in terms of moving this forward. I can't fix, I can't make, because this is all of us in terms of sort of making these changes. So the time that you can give that, even if it's just, a Zoom connect, chatting with sort of a trainee or a student over a period of time and just caring about them, having their back, even though it's probably not maybe a hugely burdensome thing for you, it can be so profoundly meaningful in terms of trainees who are thinking about, can I grow up and do what you do? Please share with us if you have some of the bandwidth for that. In addition, we'd love to know the good stuff that's happening, because we can't unless you share. So tell us about some of the mentoring successes you've had. Tell us about some of the innovations and some of the things that you're doing, probably part of your day job, or things that you're volunteering, sort of promising practices that you say, hey, this would be worth, checking out, or this would be worth getting connected with in terms of moving things forward.
Well, I will ask my earlier question that I was going to ask. In one of your early slides, you mentioned cultural competence as one of many pieces to this work. Can you say a little bit more about what cultural competence is? This is a term that has been around for many years. Sometimes we hear it as intercultural competence. I am curious to know how you define that and how that fits into that bigger picture.
Sure. Thanks for the question. So cultural competence, and other people talk about structural competence, but cultural competence it starts with the premise of there's one person you have the opportunity to know really well, and that's you. In terms of what do you like, what do you not like, what do you perceive as sort of normal and usual and expected, and what are things that are odd or different that you sort of don't know. And so you have this wonderful thing called you that you can learn about in terms of sort of insight, what you know, what you don't know, and then in that implicit bias space, what you don't even know, what you don't even know. And that's the part that's sort of the sticky wicket, because I know when I first heard about implicit bias, I'm like, well, what does this really mean? Bias doesn't sound like sort of a good thing per se, but the reality of it is if we have a pulse and we're breathing, we have bias. What clothes you choose, what food you eat, what you do on Tuesday nights, those are all things in terms of sort of the human condition. Bias actually draws back from sort of feeling safe, who's us and who's them in terms of doing things. And so bias just is a thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's just a thing. And so we just have to get in touch with, how does it drive behavior? And we know, in terms of sort of the us them thing, sometimes unconscious bias has us do things that our heart and mind wouldn't necessarily have us do. So there was a study, for example, where it was a behavioral study, and they just had ladies walking back and forth in the street, and they videotaped them. And it was easy for recruitment because all you're doing is walking back in the street. They thought it was an exercise thing. And what they did one of the times is they had an adolescent Black male walking opposite these white females. And what they found is that almost every single woman moved her purse to the other side, away from this young man. Some people moved across the street so they wouldn't actually walk right past this man. But what was really powerful was when they interviewed these ladies and they said, so what did you think of walking back and forth? And they said, easy peasy, give me my stipend, I'm good. And they said, well, wait, did you notice anything different? And they're like, nope, didn't notice anything different. So they showed them the video of their behavior, moving their purse, moving to the other side of the street, and they were dumbfounded because not a single person remembered doing that. The unconscious drives our behavior, and maybe not in ways that we mean to or are in touch with. And so being able to get in touch with that, so that we sort of know what is and what isn't, is incredibly important, because sort of giving a big smile to somebody who we think is like us, and sort of saying, oh, you're here, to someone else, again, part of the human condition. And it's okay to do both of those things, but just know that you're doing it. And when you're doing, as we move forward, so that we don't sort of fake ourselves out, that we say one thing, but then we do something different. And so that's the space in terms of implicit bias and sort of unconscious sort of bias that we need to sort of just get better in touch with, in terms of being intentional of things. So cultural competence is saying, I'm going to learn about me. I'm going to learn about sort of what I move and groove, what maybe where are my blind spots, and how I sort of move through this journey to understand. I think that for many folks, especially those that are in sort of the clinical care space, they've already engaged in this journey for a long time, because they've met lots and lots of people who are very different than them. They thought they seemed very similar, but then turned out to be very different, or they thought they were very different, but turned out they're both Vikings fans. I don't know. They're very, so that skill in terms of being able to see difference and same at the same time and hold that is one of the epicenters in terms of cultural effectiveness. It's about sort of how do we make those connections when we talk about why are we here in the first place. In the office, it's about we're here in terms of improving health, and we want to sort of come to this together in terms of doing it. I'm not going to give you your insulin. You're going to go home and do that. So that's sort of on you, but I need to inspire you in terms of doing that and unearth maybe why you won't be doing that in a way that makes sense. Sometimes you hear this in professional, motivational interviewing and things like that, but it's about sort of how do we learn about Ramadan and what that influence is in terms of diabetes, and how do we learn about these things to expand our horizons. The excellent thing in terms of folks that are alumni in a medical school is that they are lifelong learners. They didn't go into this because they want to memorize 5 things and they're done. And they're often, very often, sort of people. So they like to sort of learn about folks. And so cross-cultural effectiveness is about learning about others to be able to do that equity goal, that coming together. Why are we here? So it makes sense, so that they can sort of live better lives and we can sort of be effective in terms of doing that.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer and makes so much sense. Thank you for that. Any questions from our attendees or participants? Please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. While we're waiting for that, I'll just remind everyone that there are, throughout the month of October, additional alumni celebration webinars like this one. This Thursday at 11 Central, Dr. Jordan Lewis will present Indigenous Elders Lessons on Successful Aging and what you can do to age in a good way. And then Friday at 3 p.m., alumni have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Jacob Tolar, the Dean of the Medical School, about activities happening on the medical school's Twin Cities and Duluth campuses. So those are the webinars this week. There are additional webinars throughout the month of October. And for more information and the schedule, you can visit the Alumni Celebration website at z.umn.edu/med-alumni celebration, all one word. I don't see any additional questions. So I will just extend my thanks to you, Dr. Nunez, for sharing the incredible work that's going on toward inclusive excellence at the medical school. There's a lot to be proud of, and we appreciate your time today. And I want to extend my thanks, of course, to all of our participants. Thank you so much for being here. And we look forward to seeing you again at another webinar this month.
Sure.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
a question about whether you can get a copy of slides.
I'll share a PDF and send it to Maureen, Paul, and so you're happy to, I'm happy to do so. And for all of you, if there's something later on that sort of percolated in terms of sort of thoughts, you know, I sort of joke sharing is caring. So I'm at Nunez170. Feel free to sort of email me. Love to hear your thoughts. Love to hear the good work that you're doing. And so please be in touch and be well. Thanks, everybody. Take care.